You've reached the Homer Hotline with Dr. Kevin Solez. Please stand by.
It's about Brad Pitt, not baseball. It's about I Am Spartacus, not The Simpsons. This is the Homer Hotline, and I'm very happy to be welcoming Professor Monica Cyrino from the University of New Mexico, Professor of Classics. Welcome. You're our first expert in Hollywood stuff, so I'm excited. You're kind of celebrity adjacent. This should be fun. Thanks for making the time. I really appreciate it. Thanks for being here. So you're the first expert in film and TV adaptations of Homer we've had on the podcast. I thought I'd ask you, what's at stake because you study this stuff in a serious manner. So what's at stake in the scholarly study of contemporary works of art, like Brad Pitt's Troy, as adaptations of Homeric material?
Well, Kevin, first of all, thank you so much for having me on today. I, absolutely do take this stuff seriously in terms of my work. But like you, I'm an old-fashioned classicist that sort of found my way toward classical reception studies as one of the early adopters. I will not claim the mantle of an originator of the film. That, of course, goes to my mentor, John Solomon, who wrote the original Ancient World in the Cinema book way back in, I think it was 79, the first edition of that book. And interesting, you asked what's at stake. John talks a lot about in those early days how difficult it was to get people to take him seriously. And to some extent, we still get a little of that from our classical studies colleagues. Obviously the study of classics is a very can be seen sometimes as a sort of elite and select group of people who have access to these special languages and so forth. But there are those of us, not just in the reception field, but in lots of other subfields that are trying to make things more open, more interesting. Studying those other parts of the field that might make things more attractive and more interesting to a wider range of people. And that's what it boils down to, right? How are we going to preserve our discipline? Because we think it's important. We went to school for that instead of whatever our parents wanted us to do. We studied that. We got higher degrees in that. We want the field to continue. It's very important to me that the field of classics continues. And so, having been a university administrator, I know what that means. That means you need to have students. You need to have enrollment. You need to have classes that are going to attract students. And so, I'm sorry perhaps I shouldn't start with such a mercenary reason for what's at stake in classical reception studies. But one of the most important things is that it's a way to draw students in to the study of the ancient world. And that's important for the continuation of our discipline of classics at large, and also as a model for how to do classics in ways that is more inclusive, that attracts students from different socioeconomic levels, from different backgrounds, from like myself, I'm an immigrant. My parents came to this country. I was born in Latin America. I'm a first person in my family to go to college and graduate from college. And, I end up as a classicist, right? How did that happen? Because of great teachers who expanded my interest and expanded their way, of teaching things, teaching the classics. And that's what drew me in. So what's at stake primarily is ensuring the continuation of the field of classics. I could probably talk a little bit about what classical reception studies is for your audience, for some people who may or may not know exactly, what we're talking about.
Sure. That sounds great.
If you want me to, kind of just do a little bit of that. So, classical reception studies is a subfield in the study of the ancient Greek and Roman world, and we try to include other ancient societies, if you want to just talk about sort of antiquity in, the reception of antiquity more broadly. But if you talk about classical reception, of course, we focus on ancient Greece and Rome. and how how ancient Greece and Rome, that is literature, mythology, history, culture broadly, how those ancient cultures are represented and received by subsequent generations in their own cultural products. That is, how it gets represented in TV, film, opera, graphic novels, video games, pornography, advertisements, pop videos, heavy metal music. A lot of these sort of genres, more modern genres, are getting really hot right now. So we talk about classical reception now because we see it as a two-way engagement. You might be interested to know, or you probably already know this, that it used to be called classical tradition. So we even have courses on, that are still on our books, and we need to change them. It's called the classical tradition. And so that sort of indicates like a one-way street. Like, what did they hand down to us that we still, value or recreate today in our contemporary works of art? So that phrase classical tradition has pretty much fallen out of favor now. I'll go ahead and just say that as an authority in the field. As of this moment, so we use classical reception studies to indicate that there's this engagement back and forth. So when you say what's at stake, it's not just looking at what ancient Greece and Rome has given us and how we recreate it, but how those new creations, those films, TV shows, video games, whatever, how and whether that helps us go back and understand the ancient productions themselves. So we get a more back and forth kind of engagement when we talk about classical reception studies. So it's a very interesting way, I think, to teach classics, because you take modern productions, contemporary understandings of the ancient world, which is where our students first encounter them, right?
For sure.
And then
Percy Jackson and whatnot.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then you use that to go back and help understand the ancient products. And it helps us as scholars as well. It's not just for students, but also for scholars working in the field. So hopefully that kind of clears up that fancy title, classical reception studies, which people are like, what? Is that like an interception or a... No.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. The thing that I find most interesting in the phenomenon of classical reception is the choices of modern artists. That's so interesting. That's where, when I work on it, that's where I focus. Like, it's not because I taught a course, classics and pop culture, 6 times. And so I always focus that course on the choices of the modern artists. What does the artist get out of choosing the subject matter? I tried not to have like nerd rage when I taught the class. So the idea wasn't the modern artist gets it wrong. The idea is, can we detect what the modern artist is choosing to do, what goals the modern artist might have in making the choices they're having to include and exclude and adapt. And those are the most interesting observations from my perspective that one can make in the field of classical reception, because I think when it gets down to artistic praxis, then it's really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like for Rick Riordan or for Chris Columbus or whoever is adapting, what are their strategies and goals in adapting? That's fun stuff.
Right. And I'm so glad to hear you say that. I mean, what we do in classical reception studies, and again, why, we call it that now and why we kind of like think of our methodology in those terms, it does slide over into what they call adaptation studies, over in the English department.
Sure.
And I think that's been a really productive movement in our field to look at that. And I'm so glad to hear you say that. We all have nerd rage. My students joke to me that I have famously low standards, and I pretty much like everything that has, the ancient
I'm like
world in
that.
it.
I'm like
exactly.
That. Bring it on.
So that if something bugs me, they know that must actually truly be wrong, because so few things actually bug me. But yeah, so what you want to do, is exactly how you described it there. You're not, don't ever go to a movie or watch a movie with an ancient historian, first of all, because they have the highest level of nerd rage. I find that people in the literary, those of us who were trained as literature scholars, and some of the archaeologists, although they are also kind of high on the nerd, we're a little bit more, we're a little bit more flexible, right? We know that, Odysseus is presented this way in the Odyssey, but then he's a hero, but then in Greek tragedy, he's a villain. We know that things can change depending on how the creative artist want. I mean, reception study starts, in the ancient world, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the Aeneid is a reception of Homer. Euripides, Trojan Women is a reception of Homer. So we're not just talking about video games that came out yesterday. We're talking about a process that happened in the ancient world. And you're exactly right to always say, what does the modern audience get out of it? When I teach any reception of the classical world, I tell my students and my friends and a person that I sit next to on an airplane, because they always ask you, what do you do? I say there's three timelines, time zones, if you will, three temporalities, if you want to use the fancy word, when you watch a movie like Peterson's Troy. Okay, there is the time it is purporting to present. Okay, Bronze Age Greece, right? There is the moment that it was made. 2003, came out in 2004. That is a specific moment in time. It's going to have a political context, it's going to have a social context, it's going to have a very financial context, right? Because all big budget movies are incredibly, conservative financially. That's something we can talk about. And then the third temporality is the moment you watch it. And that changes every day, right? If I show that movie, you show that movie to your class right now in 2025, it's going to have a whole different meaning about war and fascism and, the breakdown of systems for us today, right? In our modern times. So there's always three levels of time that you have to look at whenever you look at any product, any creative product. And this goes for, any Viking movie or medieval stuff, which is becoming, more popular right now too. But in terms of classical reception, we definitely have to look at that. And I'm very happy to hear you mention the word accuracy, which gets our historian friends all ruffled. You know, Creative people, filmmakers, showrunners, TV showrunners, video game designers, they don't read Plutarch. I'm sorry to burst, the bubble of our historian friends. What they do is watch other movies and TV shows and play other video games. And so what we like to talk about in reception studies, and this is really useful in teaching, I think, too, is what's called chain of reception, or reception trajectory theory. You can call it a theory if you want, but it's basically saying that if you watch Star's Spartacus, those showrunners watched Kubrick's Spartacus, and they may have read, the play. If they're really nerdy, they read the play from the 1800s or whatever. Some of them may go back and read, what few sources there are left about the Spartan enslaved persons revolt. But most of them are consuming other creative receptions, right? And so that's why, that's why it's so kind of useless and fairly silly to say, oh my God, they put stirrups on that horse. Of course they put stirrups on that horse. Modern people can't ride horses without stirrups, So then there's really practical things too. So instead of looking for accuracy, what I tell my students or any of my friends interested in, which is the most accurate representation of ancient Greece or ancient Rome, I say, well, let's look for what we think of as the most authentic. What gets a sense of authenticity? That's what makes a program or a movie good, right? You watch it and you go, wow, I feel really good about that. I identify with the hero. I liked this film. It has to do with production values, has to do with acting, has to do with the choices that you just mentioned, the choices that creative people make, and until you've worked on a movie set, I must have written, I don't know, half of my books before I actually ever served on a movie set. And boy, did that blow my mind. I completely lost my compass in terms of how I was thinking these things were made. Like this one mind, this one, Euripidean mind that wrote this, this thing. No, it's not like that at all. It's more of that combo Homeric theory where there's like layers and layers of people, hundreds of people contributing and making decisions. Yeah, sure, the director and the showrunner can say, no, I want this color, toga, or I want this many apples on the table, but it is such a massively collaborative effort that you have to constantly be thinking about the choices. I love that you use that word, the choices that individual, very creative, very financially motivated people are making to present, Gladiator 2 or whatever. So that's a good thing to keep in mind.
Cool. So the ones when I think about film or TV receptions of Homer, there's these four that stand out from the last 30 years. Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Peterson's Troy, or what I like to call Brad Pitt's Troy. Troy, Fall of a City. And the Christopher Nolan Odyssey. No one's seen it. I watched the trailer. But it's a big film. Is that a big film from your perspective?
Yeah, it's a big film, and the trailer that's out there right now is an AI fake trailer, so it's not Christopher Nolan's trailer yet. Yeah, well, there's that tiny teaser. So, but there isn't an official. It's very short.
The thing I watched was a very short teaser.
Yes, okay, that is official. But when you said trailer, I thought you meant the long trailer. Nolan will follow. He's a very conservative guy. He will follow the exact marketing strategy that he did for Oppenheimer. So I'm thinking Oppenheimer, Odyssey. What's his third O film going to be? I keep thinking, is it going to be about Oprah? I don't know.
Yeah, Oprah's a good candidate.
Yeah, right. So the official trailer will probably come out later in November, or probably close to December, like with Oppenheimer. Cool. Yeah. So your choices are all great, Kevin. Yeah. I love those choices. When I teach my Homer in Hollywood class, which I love to do, and I've done talks about it and stuff like that. Happy to share with you my materials if you want to do it as well. I separate it into Iliad and Odyssey adaptations. First of all, that's one good way to approach it, and then I further subdivide the two into what I call like direct adaptations, or what want to be direct adaptations, like Wolfgang Petersen's Brad Pitt Troy, which is set on the beaches of Ilium, and then what are more covert, or some people use the term subterranean adaptations. That is, they refer to the narrative and sort of suggest various characters, like Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, which is what you mentioned. So if you do it that way, for example, in teaching the Iliad, you would very easily be able to use Wolfgang Petersen's Troy from 2004, the new Netflix series on that just came out in 2021, I guess it was. Was that correct? I edited a book on it and I forgot. Troy, Fall of a City, which, spoiler alert, they put it right in the title, right? Troy, Fall of a City, which
would have had to have been earlier than 2021. That was an earlier phenomenon than 2021.
How bad that I didn't write that down.
When we were writing about there was this racist backlash to the casting of Gayassi. And we were writing about that. There we go. We were writing about that earlier.
Yeah. So Troy, Fall of a City, it came out, and I did edit a book about it, and we talked a lot about the controversy, and we could talk a little bit more about that if you like too. But Troy, Fall of a City had the misfortune of coming out in this sort of post-Hamilton but pre-Bridgerton moment, where the racist backlash was particularly severe. I mean, going back to your question, your comment about the choices that creative artists make, one thing we can do in classical reception studies that we can't do in classical studies is we can actually interview people. We can talk to people that work on these productions. And I had the real honor and pleasure of working with Derek Wax, the executive producer on Troy, Fall of a City. And what they described in terms of death threats, and I mean, they were just, because I was like, when's the Odyssey coming out or whatever, and he also probably knew that Christopher Nolan was working on an Odyssey, but he said, it would be very hard for me to go back to that world, given the trauma that we suffered making that show. But we can talk a little bit more about that. So anyway, so there's Peterson's Troy. Troy Fall of a City from 2018. Those would probably be the two. And Troy Fall of a City uses a lot of pre-Iliad material and a little tiny bit of post-Iliadic material, right? So from the epic cycle, since of course we know where the Iliad ends, and the show goes all the way to the actual aftermath of the war. And then in terms of subterranean or covert adaptations, I usually teach Clint Eastwood's movie Unforgiven from 1992. And there's been some great articles about that written about how it reflects an Iliadic ethos. There are some pretty clear narrative echoes in there about the warrior, who is induced to re-enter the fray after the death of his best friend and so forth. There's some great work that's been done on Unforgiven. My students love that movie. It is so violent to watch it now. When it came out in 1992, we're like, cool, Clint Eastwood or whatever. And now you show it with our more modern sensibilities, and it is crazy violent. But I think it really gets at the heart, the sort of American West macho masculine, mythology, to use alliteration there, really gets at the heart of the warrior ethos, I think, that comes across in the Iliad. So, and several of my friends use a bunch of other war films as well that evoke Iliadic themes, but that's the one that I like to use. In terms of, and we can talk about those specifically if you want, but in terms of the Odyssey, then, just to go through these, I really, really like, I know it's kind of goofy, but I love the little miniseries from 1997, the Odyssey miniseries that was directed by Andrei Konchalovsky. It was a Hallmark miniseries. Remember that word miniseries we used to use? So in the late 90s, there was this whole sort of renaissance. Before Gladiator came out in 2000, there was this renaissance of sort of mythological adaptations. We got Xena, we got and Hercules, the Legendary Journeys, or whatever it was called. And then we got this two-night Hallmark miniseries, which is one of my favorite things. My students adore it. The casting is wonderful. Armand Assante plays Odysseus, and he mumbles a lot, so you have to put the subtitles on. Your students will complain about it, but it's a really well done miniseries with great casting. Oh Brother, Where Art Thou is, of course, the sort of, pinnacle of covert adaptations. And of course, you get to talk about adaptation studies because the Coen brothers famously said, oh, we never read the Odyssey. We don't know anything about, this whole sort of meta cinematic, performance.
What's interesting? I'm going to interrupt you to say that Derek Walcott, the Nobel Prize winning poet, author of Omeros, he also liked to claim that he'd never read Homer. And I've heard that about the Coen brothers too. So it's part of what artists are doing in their promotion of their work. And it's a strange choice, in my humble opinion. But it reveals, because it's a strange choice, it reveals something about those artists, or about what it's like to be an artist in the time they were artists, that is surprising. So why would Derek Walcott, kind of literary man, if there ever was one, decide to tell people over and over again in interviews he never read the epics? And why would the Coen brothers, who similarly are pretty thirsty for stories the way Quentin Tarantino is, like, they consume stories, why would they kind of feint and suggest that they hadn't read it? It's weird. It's weird.
It's totally interesting. And you just gave me an idea for a new article, because I have often pondered, like, if I had been born earlier in the 1900s, as my students call it, I would have loved to have been a studio historian, right? You work over at Universal Studios or MGM, and they'd be like, Monica, by the end of the day, we need a treatment on, the four emperors, the year of the four emperors. We need a one-page abstract, and I'd be like, yes, sir, I'll get right on that. And that would have been so cool to be a studio historian. And of course, then the studios, lost their power, and so. But what is interesting that you point out is that with some of these literary and mythological adaptations, and not just in film, but as you mentioned, with other types of literary works, creative artists often claim, no, I was not influenced by these other artists, just like the Roman poets, right? Like, we're not influenced by anyone. We're making up a whole new genre. So they want to claim originality and authenticity. Whereas those filmmakers and showrunners that are working on historical topics go to great lengths to get historical advisors, on-set academic consultants. I mean, I've done it myself. In order to add this veneer, which of course they totally ignore you, but they add this veneer of accuracy. So that's a really interesting thing, I think, that we could delve into more. Like, why do, those that are concerned with financial bottom lines, perhaps, I don't know, I'm spitballing here, why are they more concerned with telling their prospective audiences or subscribers or ticket buyers that their programs have been, enhanced by this academic, background? Whereas individual artists or artistes, if you will, are very keen on saying, no, I am, this came, fully armored out of the top of my head without any consultation. Yeah, exactly.
It's like it's a reflex.
Yeah.
Because the work that they've produced self-evidently deeply engaged with the things they're claiming never to have read.
Yeah.
So the Coen brothers to claim they never read the Odyssey seems strange when you watch "O Brother, Where Art Thou?"
Yeah.
And Derek Walcott, it's even more strange.
Right,
because the poetry deeply engages in all kinds, myriad ways. And so what's the point? And maybe it's an instinct, and then it becomes fun for the artist to tell a lie in an interview, because you don't ever have to tell them what you really think.
No,
you could just tell them some convenient things that are easy to say, and
Absolutely. And you call it a reflex, and then say it as a fun thing. So maybe we could just call it a flex, like our students say, right? Like, it's kind of a flex in the sense that they know what they're doing. They know that they're claiming authenticity and originality for themselves. They're also acknowledging what I talked about a few minutes ago, which is a reception trajectory, right? Maybe they didn't actually, pick up a copy of Homer.
And they don't want to say that their knowledge of the Odyssey comes from the 1960s film or something like that.
Yeah,
right?
From Kirk Douglas
I wish they would just say that. That would be so fun for me.
Yeah.
But they don't want to say it.
I'm with you on that. And, I've given talks, all over the world, and people will say to me like, hey, well, I'll get a question from the audience. And they'll go, do we know if that person studied classics at school? And I'm always like, oh my God, facepalm emoji. I'm like, it's not whether they studied classics at school. It's like, what movies did they consume? What novels did they read? What Greek mythology teacher, told them, was the best, and now, we have this whole cottage industry of these retellings, right? In the voice of Circe, these.
Yeah. You're freezing there. Maybe I'm having an internet problem. We have to pause for a second here, Monica, because I can't hear you.
Due to engage.
Okay. I have to interrupt you because you glitched out for about 10 seconds.
Okay.
So let's just rewind.
Okay.
Just a
You probably got
bit
enough. You probably got enough on that topic.
I think we got enough on that topic. Yeah.
Okay.
So now Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to finish my list, a couple more Odyssey
Yeah,
adaptations. So we were talking about the Coen brothers, "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou," which does take a little bit more from the year 2000, takes a little bit more of contextualization for our students today. There are some difficult scenes in that film that we do need to talk about. Outside of just reception studies, and we were talking earlier about the temporalities, right? The time
yeah,
this movie is set in the old South in the 1930s.
yeah,
Really needs some historical contextualization for our students
yeah,
that some of us
sure.
may or may not feel comfortable doing. The other one that I teach sometimes, if you want to do a sad a sad Odyssey. I don't know if you know this film, Anthony Minghella's Cold Mountain, with Nicole Kidman and Jude Law.
I do know
Um,
the film. Yeah,
yeah, it is. I tell my students it's a sad Odyssey, but it also very much evokes Odyssean. Pretty much any movie is an Odyssey in the sense that like somebody's trying to get go from point A to point B. But this one
yeah,
does evoke certain characters and tropes from the Odyssey. So I think that you can use that one as well. Although it is very sad, it's a Civil War thing, Civil War movie, a post Civil
yeah.
War, but it
But
does
absent husband kind of stuff.
yeah, yeah. And
Yes.
of course now we also have even sadder film by that Ray Fiennes starred in, that came out last fall, The Return, right? Which starts with him washed up. It's the second half of the Odyssey. So it starts with him washed up on the beach of Ithaca, and it just focuses on, it's very heavy into the post traumatic stress that veterans feel, and how he
That's cool.
re-engages into his. Yeah, if you haven't seen it, check it out. I think it's still on Netflix.
Yeah.
Incredibly dark, very violent. The final scene, spoiler alert, with the suitors, the slaughter of the suitors, is about the most violent thing I've ever seen, and I don't know if I could show it in class, even at a public school. It's pretty intense, but yeah.
Wow.
So we want to look at the way these films and TV shows adapt the Homeric material, whether it's using, trying to tell the story in the quote unquote same context, like Peterson's Troy, or by using the tropes and the plots and the characters and the scenes in a different environment. Oh, another one I forgot to mention is Fury Road from Mad Max
Yeah.
Fury Road from
Yeah.
2015. Some people have written some pretty interesting things about how that evokes Iliadic tropes too, and of course students love that film, so that
Yeah.
one's a good one to use.
Uh,
Um,
I,
just one more, the
yeah.
recent TV show last year in 2024 on Netflix called Chaos. I don't know if
Yeah.
you saw that.
I
Yeah,
saw some. Yeah.
yeah, kind of a little bit of a swing and a miss, to use our metaphor of the day.
Yeah.
It does have some Homeric material layered in there, but it's a bit of a dog's breakfast, as they say. It just mashed up too much mythology, some great performances, some very dark moments, and I know some people that are going to try and work on that because it was canceled, after one season. So
Yeah.
once things are canceled, you can write a book about it, or shall we say, not continued. But there's some Homeric stuff in there. Again, more the
Yeah.
post-traumatic stuff of what happened to the Trojans, the
Yeah.
the survivors of Troy, and so forth. So
Yeah.
that's another piece that we can look at.
Yeah.
Um,
Very, very cool.
yeah, and we don't know too
Um,
much about Nolan's, just to go back to the ring
yeah.
composition, to the one you mentioned at the beginning. We don't know too much about Christopher Nolan's Odyssey. He's being his typical self in keeping, the plot under wraps. Given the rest of his, corpus of movies, I would imagine he's going to stick. I would imagine. What do I know? I don't know anything. But I'm hopeful that he's going to include like some Inception style flashback stuff, like in the Odyssey, right? I just have
Mhm.
this feeling that he and his producing partner Emma Thomas who is his spouse, who did study classics and ancient history in school. And
Yes.
she and he together are writing the script. I'm pretty confident that it's going to be it's going to have a lot of cool flashback stuff in it. I don't know. I
Cool.
say I'm confident,
Cool.
but I have no idea.
I look forward
They've
to it.
got $250 million, Kevin. So, they can pretty much
I,
do whatever they
I'm
want.
impressed. I'm impressed. So what drew you in? Because you were being trained as a classicist, and it sounds like you were in a place where you could study with John Solomon. Does that
No,
accurate?
actually, I wish
No.
I was. Yeah, I don't know what drew me in, really. I think that, when I went to undergrad to be a sports journalist, I took a class, one of those survey classes, ancient Greece and Rome, and like a lot of 18-year-olds, I fell in love, so I fell in love, started a classics degree, and, a few years later found myself with a PhD and a job. That's back when you could get jobs.
Yeah.
And, I guess the way I grew up in my own personal, interests, I started using a lot of modern popular culture in my teaching. I taught for 25 years a Greek mythology class, just like you, with 800 students. Okay. So, in order to hold the interest of 800 students in this massive lecture hall, I would do clips of movies. Remember when we used to queue up clips on
Yeah.
VHS, and then later, we could use DVDs and stuff. But I would queue up clips from Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure or whatever, and to keep to keep the interest of my students alive in the class. And then in the late 90s, I ran into John Solomon at a conference, and I said, "Hey, I love your book." And he sort of took me under his wing, and there were a couple of other people, Martin Winkler, Maria Weick, who were just starting off in this new field of classical reception studies. John reissued his book in 2001, and basically, the field was born, right? Like, reborn, if you want to say, with the success of Gladiator in 2000. So it's a relatively young field, subfield
Sure.
within classical studies, but it's actually getting a little, those of us who work on, well, the first few people worked on film. And then some of us started working on TV. So, and we were like, oh my God, TV, that's so edgy, that's so different.
Yeah.
It's so funny how there's always these hierarchies, right, in what we do. We're so territorial. And now, I'm an eminence gris or whatever, and the newer the newer folks, shall we say, the more the people coming into the field now are working on, graphic novels and video games and you can't even call them video games anymore, right? Like digital, whatever they're called. So there's a lot of, stuff going on with advertising, with pop music videos. It's a really interesting field, and I think we have to keep a few of those theories in mind, that chain of reception theory. We need to continue to sort out, those productions that, try, quote unquote, to recreate the ancient world in a historical way. And those that are more covert or subterranean, depending on which term you want to use. So we still have our little kind of baskets and categories, because we are classicists, so we like to classify things. But the field is just, breaking wide open, and there's just a lot more stuff to continue to look at,
Yeah.
and more things are being produced. Every day somebody says, "Oh my God, did you hear about, this that's coming out?" And I get asked to consult on all sorts of productions that 99% of them go nowhere. Oh my God, like working in Hollywood, quote, the industry, you can call it Hollywood, but there's a lot going on in Europe as well. Has taught me a lot about just how stable academia is.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
you will allow me a
Exactly.
little dark joke in
Yeah.
this.
Yes, please. Yeah, I was a Latin language consultant for a kind of drama. What do we want to say? Supernatural drama set in Canada. Is a series. I guess shot 2 seasons, and I found them a little chaotic to work with.
Oh my God. It is about the most chaotic. Yeah. What is it? I also did some language consulting for a vampire movie. What is it with supernatural
Yeah.
or spooky movies that they just assume their characters, spoke Latin or the spells have to be in Latin or
Well,
whatever. You
yeah.
see how that
Well,
carries over, right?
but you see
You
what
know.
they get out of adapting that way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then hiring me, like I want ecclesiastical Latin, a curse. And like I can go and find a curse
Yeah, exactly.
in church Latin, and then I can adapt it to whatever's happening in the episode. I can do that. They
Right.
can't.
Yeah.
I can.
And you make
But
choices, like you were
you
saying
see
before.
why they want it. Why they want it, right?
Yeah,
Because they feel that it carries so much authority for
it
them.
does. It does.
Oh, it's the real deal. I'm
Yeah,
a
and
serious artist.
and is it because they read Livy, and Tacitus? No, it's because
No,
they've seen
yeah,
it in other movies. If the spell is not in
yeah.
Latin,
It's
it's
from
not
The
going to work.
Exorcist.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. So you and I, as consultants, we also make choices, right? So when they
yeah,
called me up and they said, our vampire needs to speak these, you need to translate these lines into Latin, and then you have to coach our vampire into speaking these
yeah,
lines. And I'm like, well, how old is your vampire? I'm
yeah,
like, what pronunciation do you want? I mean, is it classical? And they're looking at me like I'm crazy. So I got to make the
yeah,
choice that my vampire was going to speak, classical, what we
yeah,
think is classical pronunciation as
yeah, yeah.
opposed to,
I didn't get back
yeah.
to them. I didn't ask. They asked for a voice recording by
Yeah.
me
Yeah, that's
of
what
the
they do.
Latin
Yeah.
spoken. And I didn't ask them what century they were looking for. I just read it like a good classicist,
Good for
like
you.
Ciceronian era Latin. I just read it like that
Yeah.
and gave it to them.
Yeah.
Yeah, like you
Well,
did.
I was lucky because they did the same thing with me. They said make a recording and we'll give it to the actor. And they're so cloak and dagger, right? The industry is
Yeah,
ridiculously cloak and dagger. They're so everything's so mysterious. And then they called me. This was being shot in New Mexico, which stands in for always these post-apocalyptic places. And they said, "We need you on set to coach our actor." And guess what? It turned out to be Colin Farrell. So not only did I get to meet Colin Farrell and I asked him about the movie Alexander and everything. So it actually worked out kind of, my another one of my lucky breaks in my ridiculously
yeah,
lucky
for
life.
sure.
And yeah, and that was really fun. And that was one of the first movie sets I ever actually, worked on and blew my mind and really like reprogrammed my mind in how I do my scholarship. Like after I had that experience, I never talked about film and TV adaptations in the same way.
Hmm.
So it was really mind blowing for me, or I should say mind opening. But
Yeah,
yeah,
cool.
so that's how it started.
Yeah, it's a great story.
Yeah, I actually did wrote a little article for Classical Journal. Was it Classical Journal? Yes, it was, I think, about my experience on set and how it changed my approach to doing meeting Colin Farrell. It's a little bit of a funny, like a lighthearted article. I
Yeah.
think it's called "I Was Colin Farrell's Latin Teacher." I forget what year it was, but I'm happy to send it to you.
Very cool. I'm sure listeners will be interested in that also.
Yeah.
That's cool. So I have an idea for a film based on Greek mythology and Hera. And one of the things is that I consider Hera so interesting and unadapted. Talk about choices of artists. When they adapt Hera, they often just do whatever the hell they want because they don't care about what she was or is or whatever.
Mhm.
They don't care about her, so she becomes just something other entirely.
Mhm.
And so I was wondering, what is the mythological content that you would most like to see adapted, but hasn't received much attention? What would you like to see a movie about?
Well, I'm gonna be very happy to answer your question, but I have to ask you a question. What is it about Hera that you would add? And did you see the Hera that they portrayed on that recent show, Chaos? Because she had a lot more agency than most
Yeah,
Heras do.
I saw Hera
And
in Chaos, and I thought that was cool.
Janet
What?
McTeer is a great
Yeah,
actress, and I think she brought a different vibe to the usual
yeah.
jealous shrew Hera or
Well,
Juno
right.
that we
Yeah,
see. And I
yeah.
wondered what you thought about her.
Well, I didn't pay a lot of attention to chaos because I found it grating.
Yeah.
So I watched some. I think I can see in my mind's eye the Hera character that you're referring to. But my interest in Hera is that, so it's sort of like what I teach my mythology students. We could have had a mythological tradition that did not have these senior female characters who perpetually disagree with and mock and thwart and work against the decisions of the chief male god. We could have had a mythological tradition that was like that. There's lots of mythological traditions out there that are like that don't have characters like Hera, Athena, and Demeter. And I don't mean they don't have characters like that. I mean, they don't have characters like that in the way that those goddesses approach Zeus.
Right.
So Hera's diversity and belligerence towards Zeus, not like a nagging wife kind of thing, but as like the queen of heaven, and just having a different idea about the Dios Boule, and thinking that he was an idiot and working against him, is a fascinating feature of our mythology. And how often does she get her way? About half.
Right.
And then half bad things happen to her, but the other half of the time she gets her way. And I just don't think she's given a lot of credit. And people don't even know what I'm talking about. Like, okay, some experts will know what I'm talking about, but if you haven't read the Iliad and the hymns a lot, then you don't know what I'm talking about. When I say that Hera works so persistently against Zeus.
Well, I think we've got an idea for a treatment, Kevin. You and I can put this together, because my idea for some mythology that I would like to see portrayed more deeply, more interestingly, really dovetails with what you're talking about, because as you know, I'm also an Aphrodite scholar, and I've published a book about Aphrodite and written several articles about, that's my literary bona fides, so that I work on Aphrodite's stuff. So what we could do is pitch a series where the major goddesses, episode by episode, maybe each one can be focused in an episode, and choosing from the myths, get to work against Zeus. We could throw in Poseidon and Hades in there if we want to too. But so I would like to see, Aphrodite given a little bit more, just like Hera is like the shrewish wife, Aphrodite is sometimes, the party girl or whatever. I do think in the series Troy Fall of a City, there were some interesting moments, and they could have done more. And maybe we can rewatch those as we're putting together our pitch, because I think there are a couple of great scenes. Obviously, the Judgment of Paris scene, which opens episode 1 and has Athena, Aphrodite, and Hera in it, and Zeus and Hermes, would be a really interesting thing for us to see, the way those three goddesses, present themselves or are presented in that series. And then Zeus says, "Everybody step back. This is the mortal's decision." And then this is paralleled by another scene later toward the end of the series. I forget which episode, 7 or 8, where Zeus and the goddesses are standing in front of the walls of Troy, and Aphrodite's like, "This can't happen. This can't happen." And Zeus says, "You don't decide fate, Aphrodite. None of us do." Right. And Hakeem Kaikazim with that deep voice and everything. Right. He says, "You don't decide fate, Aphrodite. None of us do." And it's that perfect thing, right, where we tell our students, even Zeus is subject to fate
according to the Prometheus Bound, but not according to everything. The Prometheus Bound is the famous thing where Prometheus, who is not a reliable narrator,
right,
is claiming that Zeus is fated just like everybody else, but then there's all kinds of other evidence. Certainly the religious sensibilities of the ancient Greeks would say no.
Well, I mean, to take it back to Homer, I mean, I would argue that, like the Coen brothers, Zeus says what he wants to say when he, depending on which audience, he's trying to influence, right?
Absolutely. That's the original That's the original mythos.
Exactly.
Right here, let me give you an exemplar that will help my argument at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. So,
Yeah.
if Troy's gonna fall, Troy's gonna fall, right? Whether,
Yeah.
so yeah, so I would
No.
like to see a little bit more
Yeah.
about Aphrodite. There was, you may
I would enjoy
recall,
that also. I would
there
really enjoy more
there
Aphrodite. Yeah.
there was a very cheesy TV series called Valentine on the CW, because they are contractually obligated to only have uh cheesy series
Yeah.
on the CW, and it was called
Yeah.
Valentine, and it was interesting because it focused on a group of gods that are down on Earth, sort of like Chaos. Not Chaos isn't really, they're still on Olympus, but they have come down to Los Angeles to help mortals fall in love. And Jamie Murray, who was also in the Spartacus series, plays Aphrodite, and I think her name is like Grace Valentine or something like that. And
Awesome.
she's the matriarch of this family, and it had a bunch of weird random characters in it, like Titans, and like it wasn't very mythologically, like sound,
Yeah.
if there's such a thing. But it only lasted like a season and a half or something. And but it was interesting because she had a lot of power. She was a matriarch. She had a Hephaestus. She had an Ares. I don't think there was a Zeus. I can't remember, but it was pretty bad. But it was entertaining enough, and I give them props for what they tried.
Yeah.
But I think that Greek mythology works better if it has a little bit of a modern spin, because too many
Yeah.
flowing robes and Clash of the Titans stuff and
I agree with
animatronic,
that.
Yeah, makes it a
Yeah.
little cheesy.
Have always been inspired by Claude Levi-Strauss's conceptualization of myth variants, which is that they are all equal. That's a very challenging idea. But so every reception of every pre-existing art work, each of them is its own version of the myth, and none supersedes the others. Chronology is not a sufficient justification to claim one is truer or whatever, more authentic than another. Now, again, this is basically it's a position that Claude Levi-Strauss took that is very difficult to adapt to. Most scholars would resist coming to that conclusion. But I have tried when I work on reception or teach reception things, I've tried to take that notion into account. So like throughout his operatic work, the Mythologique, and I don't know how much you have engaged with this, but these books are crazy.
Right.
So I'm thinking about the one that I've read most in depth, which is The Raw and the Cooked, which is one of the volumes of Les Mythologiques. Anyway, yeah, he says, like, look, if they put on a production of Oedipus or somebody writes an Oedipal novel today, it is one of the variations that we have to consider in our comparative mythology.
Right.
We can't rank or place these variations into a hierarchy. Now, the really the very useful part of that formulation from a scholarly perspective is a late variation might be fuller to what the community believes than the fragmentary earlier variation.
Right.
So that's something real for us, where we might not like the 3rd century CE example of a myth because we're working on Homeric stuff, but there's no fact of life that makes it so that 3rd century CE version of the myth is less authentic than a Homeric version. There's nothing. There's nothing in the universe that makes it inherently less authentic, less descriptive of ancient Greek culture. So it's a hard lesson that Levi-Strauss is trying to teach us. But a lot of your interests and your chain of reception and all that really engages these Levi-Straussian ideas.
Absolutely. And I think most of us receptionistas, as we like to call ourselves are probably would lean toward that formulation. Absolutely. I mean, obviously, when you're looking at historical, versions of history, there's more reliable and less reliable, and there's late antiquity and medieval and Renaissance agendas and so forth. I mean, every time period is going to have their agenda in presenting history, literature, or adaptations of myth or whatever, right? So you could maybe draw a little bit of a line between, the historical material as opposed to historical sources, as opposed to what you were just talking about, the mythological and the literary versions. Absolutely. There is nothing that is more or less valid just because, Homer said it or, Beyonce said it. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So
Yep. Yep.
I'm with you on that. I mean, obviously, you were talking earlier about nerd rage. There's also nerd thrill. Sometimes we'll be watching a music video and we'll see, a peacock feather or something, to get back to your Hera
Like
fandom
Call Me
or whatever.
by Your Name.
Yeah,
Like Call Me by Your Name. Oh God.
Yeah,
Yes.
and so you get
That's
a
a
nerd
nerd thrill.
you get a nerd thrill. So
Yeah.
let's minimize the nerd rage and seek out nerd thrills, which is basically why I'm in the business of classical reception, is because
All right.
there's nothing better than a nerd thrill in my estimation. So
All right. Well, the
I
Homer Hotline, seeking
yeah,
out nerd thrills since 2025.
there
All
you
right.
go. I've just given you a good log line.
Yes, I love it. So,
All right.
in my humble opinion, the best actor to portray something Homeric that I don't believe has been cast in a Homeric role is Dwayne Johnson, The Rock. So, from your perspective, who is the best actor to perform something Homeric and why? Maybe an Aphrodite that you want to see.
Oh, that I would want to see. Oh, I was thinking that maybe.
No, it can be existing. I'm just
okay.
saying, who's the best actor
Yeah.
to perform something Homeric? So for me,
I have to say,
it's Dwayne Johnson.
Yeah, I have to say I love Dwayne Johnson for who he is as a person and a performer. And I've written a piece about his star text. This is what the film studies people call like the sort of trajectory. I'm sorry to use that word again, but the list, the sort of curriculum vitae of an actor, like all their different performances, and some of them can be off camera too. They can be interviews, podcasts, appearances on Jimmy Fallon or whatever. So I wrote about his star text leading up to his role in the Hercules film, right? And why he's so perfect to be cast as Hercules. So I mentioned earlier the Konchalovsky's Odyssey, the miniseries from '97. I really, and this will kind of link into something we were just talking about the goddesses and how they get a little shortchanged in some of these productions. I really like the women, the female actors in that film. Vanessa Williams, who played Calypso, and Bernadette Peters, of course, a multi, honored actor on stage, who played Circe in just unforgettably strong, beautiful roles. I loved both of them in those performances. And I think that television actually has a little bit more leeway to allow female actors to expand their roles. You even see that in Troy Fall of a City, where you actually get a Hecuba, which you don't have in Peterson's Troy, right? Yeah. Peterson's Troy is all about the boys. In Peterson's Troy, I think, I would have to go with Sean Bean, who gets to actually survive his role as Odysseus, unusually in Sean Bean's star text, right? Because the famous thing about him is that he always dies. In his star text. So I thought his Odysseus was, had the right, in my nerd mind, had the right combination of Iliadic, Homeric, and Euripidean, or Homeric and Euripidean Odysseus's. Whereas the Troy Fall of a City, Richard Mall was too gloomy of an Odysseus for my taste. Odysseus has to have a twinkle in his eye, and I'm gonna, say the slightly, provocative answer that I think that David Gyasi was one of the best Achilles I have ever seen on screen.
Fantastic.
I absolutely adore David Gyasi. as an
Yeah.
actor. He's in
He's
one of my
very
favorite
good.
shows right now, The Diplomat, which is on
Yeah,
Netflix.
I like The Diplomat. It's very good.
Oh, it's a
But
great show.
boy, does that man steal your eye when he's on screen. She's a
Yeah,
perfect Achilles.
he's a
You can't
perfect
stop
Achilles.
looking at you can't stop looking at him.
Yeah, his
Um,
voice timbre, the dialogue that was written for him, to Odysseus, this was always a shabby war, right? His
yeah,
final words that he says
yeah,
before he dies, it's just like, it was just written so well, and his performance was so good. And I gotta say that I'm influenced by, the extra cinematic, uproar is too gentle a word, over his casting, that that influences my choice as well, because it's the kind of thing that I think Achilles himself would have approved,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, you can fight about who I am, my
Exactly.
legacy, that's the kind of thing that we're told that he told Thetis, right, that he
Yeah.
wants to be talked about forever. So
Yep.
but gosh, in terms of, I don't think I would ever try to cast someone as Aphrodite in our television show that we're going to write together.
Yeah.
I would leave that to the experts, heavily influenced by us, of course, once they give us a list of choices. But yeah, I'm not sure. Who would you cast as Aphrodite? That's a hard one. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
And
I
you know
mean,
what?
I'm gonna
I would,
answer the question. I don't have an answer yet, but I'll
yeah,
try to answer this question. Although it's the kind of question that a guy feels is just gonna be too revealing about
it's too
himself.
revealing. Yeah. Well, and there
Yeah.
you mentioned at the top of the hour what one thing that really interests you are the choices that creatives make. Why do you think Wolfgang Petersen chose a diminutive German actress to play Helen in Troy? Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And these showrunners, and they're not all straight males or whatever. There's women, there's non-binary people. There are straight men, straight women,
Yeah.
non-straight men, non-straight women, and they're making choices based on their personal preference. They go
Anyway,
to the casting
yeah.
director, curiously,
I
in
have
Troy
an
Fall of a
answer.
City, we
I have
have
an
another
answer,
German actress
which is
as
yeah.
Helen. Oh, go
Yeah,
ahead.
yeah. My answer is the performer Peaches.
Oh, yeah, I do know who that is.
Peaches. That's who I'd cast if she would take the casting. That's who I'd cast.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
I suppose now, as a woman of a certain age, my Aphrodites and my Venuses in my mind are getting a little older, as are my Helens. My
Well,
Helens get
yeah.
older and older, and my Parises get younger and younger.
That's great.
That's a big thing in the zeitgeist right now, right? The age gap romance between the older woman and the younger male, right? So
I don't know. You're
there's
just
a
talking Hollywood talk. I don't recognize it, but okay.
Well, there was a movie on called The Idea of You with Anne Hathaway, and it's on Netflix right now. It's one of their top-rated, most popular movies, where Anne Hathaway is a 40-something art gallery owner, and she has a romance with a 20-something boy band
There you go.
singer. And then there's the movie Baby Girl with Nicole Kidman, who is a
Mhm.
big corporate CEO, well into her 50s, who has a romance with one of her interns. And so this is definitely in the zeitgeist right now. So I think we could have a Helen in Paris or an Aphrodite and Chryses. Hey, there you go. How about an
Yeah,
Aphrodite and Chryses
yeah,
short film? It would have to be a short film because the Homeric
yeah.
hymn is pretty short. But I'd like to see Aphrodite roaming the hillsides of Mount Ida looking for trouble, and in the
Yes.
form
And
of a
we'd have
young
to
cowboy.
we have to dramatize the flowers blooming as she walks, like they do in the
Yes,
Homeric hymn.
yeah,
Yeah.
that would be great.
And Anchises, so Anchises is like a Paris figure in that myth. He's just a young shepherd prince.
Yes, but a
So we
well-accomplished
need,
one, right? He's a hunter.
yeah,
He's got several trophies. The guy is experienced.
yeah,
He's no virgin, right? I mean, he
yeah,
is an experienced hunter, and
yeah,
he even makes the right guess. He's like, I'm pretty sure you're a goddess,
yeah.
but I'm
I'm
going to
pretty sure
sleep
you're
with
a
you
goddess.
anyway.
That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So,
yeah,
and Kaises is no dummy. So I would want someone, at least in his 30s for that role. No little pretty
yes.
boys.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that sounds good.
Okay, so I
Yeah,
think we've solved Hollywood, Kevin.
there we go. Yes, we've come to the end of it. All right. Thank you so much, Monica, for being with us and for this long format interview. And we didn't even talk about the Blue Jays, the Dodgers, and my poor Baltimore Orioles. Um, so thank you for being here.
It's been a pleasure. We've had a great conversation, and I hope that we can do it again sometime. Talk about maybe some Roman stuff next time.
Sounds good to me. Okay, everybody. The Bard has left the chat.
You've been listening to the Homer Hotline with Dr. Kevin Solez. The Bard has left the chat. Like, subscribe, hit the bell.